Ramadan. Today we are going to study a single verse from Surah Tawbah, and to be precise, this is verse 122. And this verse has a very important message for all of us. So let's first start reading the text. So it says, وَمَا كَانَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ لِيَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. It was not possible that all Muslims should have come out. But why did this not happen, that a few from each of their groups could come forward to obtain sound understanding of religion and warn the people of their nation about these attitudes they had adopted when they returned to them, so that they could remain secure from God's grasp? This verse is the source, it is the fountainhead in the Quran which speaks about the responsibility of people who should become specialists in religion, people who should become doctors of Islam, people who are able to explain Islam at a scholarly level. So the Quran says that this is a task of specialization, and the word which it uses for this specialization is tafaqquh fi din. So liyatafaqahu fi din, and this actually means that a person should have a very deep and a very sound understanding of religion. In other words, he should be a scholar, a person who is well grounded in religious disciplines. So the Quran is actually making an appeal here, and this appeal is made in a very earnest tone. It is said that not everyone is required to do that, but at least there should be some people who should come forward and gain sound knowledge in religion, and then go back to their own people and warn them about wrong attitudes in religion. So as far as the Quran is concerned, it has made its appeal, it has asked people to make themselves available. Not everyone, of course, is geared for this task. Not everyone has the aptitude to become a scholar. But then there has to be a group of people who should continue to pay heed, and if they have the aptitude, they have the resources, they have the opportunity, then just as they become specialists and professionals in other fields, they become doctors, they become engineers, they become accountants, they become architects, artists, painters, and whatnot. So just as they choose a career for themselves, the Quran says that there should be some people in our ummah, in our whole community, who should come forward and present themselves that yes, they would like to become specialists, people who would like to first understand religion in its depth, and then are able to communicate the understanding to other people. The most important thing here that we have to understand is that this sound understanding actually means that as far as religion is concerned, they should have this very in-depth comprehension of what the Quran and the Sunnah stand for. So the sources of religion, there are two: the Quran and the Sunnah. And people who are doctors of religion, who are scholars of religion, must understand the language of the Quran. They must understand how we make derivations from the Quran, how directives are inferred from the Quran. The Quran is a book of literature. It's a masterpiece of literature. It has a ring about it which can only be appreciated if a person has a literary taste. So a very important qualifying trait which a scholar of Islam must have is that he or she must have a literary appreciation of the language. The literary taste which is found in many people is the same that can be utilized in understanding the Quran. The Quran has been steeped in a metaphor, in a simile structure, in all sorts of literary devices which are unique in nature. The way things are expressed in the Quran, the way they are, they go about understanding how things in literary taste and with literary background and appreciation should be understood, is something which is very unique to the Quran. It has its own aura about it. The Quran is divided into 7 chapters. The chapters are arranged in a sequence, and within each chapter we have surahs which are arranged in pairs. Then the chapters have their own theme, the surahs have their own theme, and the way these the whole discourse progresses in a surah is not like a linear progression the way that we would generally write books or articles that we are used to. It's more of a literary progression in which we have conditional statements, we have pauses, we have ellipses, we have suppressed statements, we have parallel statements, we have questions, we have answers. So it's like a living dialogue. So remember this, the genre of the Quran is that it's a living dialogue. between the people of those times, the 7th century Arabs, and of course, this dialogue has been authored by none other than the Almighty Himself. So, if you are able to understand this aspect of the Quran, that it is a dialogue, it's a conversation between people who were there in Arabia and between God Himself, we would come to realize how vibrant this dialogue is and how we are able to gauge this dialogue in a very, very precise way. Another important feature of religion, which scholars need to understand, is that the Quran addresses the mind. The Quran brings forth the mental ability that we have to question. It says that you have to critically analyze the concepts that it gives. Whenever it wants us to believe in something, it does not want us to believe in a dogmatic way. It wants us to believe on the basis of reasoning. So, whatever the Quran has asked us to believe, if you look at various aspects, you'll find that they are reinforced, they are punctuated with reasoning. So, if we have to believe in the hereafter, the Quran provides the reasoning in the hereafter. If we have to believe in the books of God, the Quran provides that reasoning. It provides why we think that the Quran is a book which is of divine nature. What is the characteristic that makes it a book that is not human? So all these aspects have been discussed in the Quran in detail, and that is why, at one instance, the Quran says that people who will end up in hell, they will talk to each other and say, "Law kunna nasma'u aw naqilu, ma kunna fi ashabis sa'ir," which means that had we listened intently and used our intellect, "Law kunna nasma'u aw naqilu," had we listened intently or used our intellect, we would not have ended in hell. Because we did not use our intellect, because we did not use our common sense to understand this message, we have now ended up here. So, the important thing that we have to understand is that in order to become a scholar of Islam, especially of the Quran, as I said, firstly, a person must have that literary appreciation. It's not a book of history, it's not a book of grammar, it's not a book of philosophy, it's not a book of prose, it's not a book of poetry. It is a unique book. And that uniqueness is something that can be appreciated if we have that literary taste. Without that literary taste, a lot of in depth meaning of the Quran would elude us. So that is something which is of primary importance. Of course, the language of the Quran, as I said, is something, the genre, if we can come the closest to it, is that of dialogues. It's like some conversation going on between real characters. We have the idolaters of Arabia, the people of the book. Of course, the hypocrites were there, and then the Prophet himself, the believers. So, and of course, the angels, and then God authoring this whole dialogue. So, if we are able to understand this whole scenario, it would become very easy for us to understand the Quran. And then, of course, is the ability to derive various precepts of the Sharia, because we know that the Quran is also a book which gives us the contents of religion. The contents of religion, if we look at the Quran, are two primarily. One of them is classified as Al-Kitab or Al-Sharia, which means the law, and the other one is Al-Hikmah or wisdom, which encompasses the articles of faith and morality. So, as far as the Sharia is concerned, it gives us laws, like, for example, laws relating to the political arena, to the economic sphere, to the social sphere, to the penal sphere, to dietary laws. All these laws, they relate to how a person should abide by certain prescriptions of the Almighty. And then we have the hikmah part, which of course is something which is an amalgam of the of morality and of course the articles of faith. And here again, just as the Sharia, the part which is enshrined as the law of the Quran, has its own reasoning. It tells us every time that if you are to abstain, for example, from taking interest, or to abstain from alcohol, or to abstain from consuming pork, it gives that reasoning. You'll find that the Quran gives the laws that it wants to give on the basis of sound reasoning, so that we are able to not only understand ourselves but also communicate to other people of other religions. And our only line of communication with people of other religion is this intellectual reasoning. So unless we are able to rationally and reasonably argue in favor of something, the line of reasoning would never be established. So the Quran wants us to understand what it says and to reflect on it as well. So you would often come across such verses as liyadabbaru or liyatafakkaru, or it says that this book has signs in it which are eye openers for people who reflect, for people who would like to deliberate. So reflection, deliberation, these are all instances in which we have to go deep in the Quran. So scholars of the Quran, of course, they have to know the Arabic language. The classical Arabic language is something which is in itself a unique thing. It's one of the greatest exponents of this classical language is the Quran itself. But at the same time, we also have poetry and prose of those times saved up with us, and they, of course, provide a lot of insight into that language. So, in order to have a deep understanding of the idiom of the Quran, we need to also understand the classical Arabic idiom. And for that, also, it takes a lot of time. It's not just simple Arabic that you are mastering. If you are going to master the classical Arabic of the Quran, it might take you years and years for that. But then, of course, this is a task that every scholar has to undertake. It's not a couple of years that he needs to study these things. So just as a doctor, an engineer, or any person who becomes a professional, he spends years and years in acquiring that knowledge. In a very similar way, if someone has to become a scholar of his religion, then he has to have all these abilities, these traits, of course, the aptitude and the wherewithal. An important thing here is that as far as understanding religion is concerned, and as far as understanding the Quran is concerned, one of the most important things is that this understanding is something of that should actually emanate after a broad-based educational project that a person must go through. So, in our Muslim community, in our Muslim Ummah, there are instances, especially in the subcontinent and some other countries, in which children are admitted at a very tender age to become scholars. For example, at the age of 7 or 8, they are admitted into a religious seminary or a madrasa, and without even analyzing if the boy or the girl who is admitted to a madrasa would like to become what we have decided him or her to become as parents, we make this decision on behalf of our children. This is something which is absolutely unwarranted. People who would like to become scholars of Islam should do so out of their own choice, and this can only be done once they are mature enough. So for this, it is essential that they have a 12-year-old or a 14-year educational background of broad-based education. So just as people become specialists after this broad-based education, after passing through high school or upper middle school, they then choose the field of study that they would like to go in, and then they go to those universities. So in a very similar way, people who would like to become scholars of religion, they must be given this choice to choose for themselves if they have to adopt this field, and then that too should be done at that mature age in which you have had that school education, and now at the university level you would like to become a scholar and you would like to become someone who is going to deeply study religion. An important thing for all scholars of religion is that in spite of the fact that they might be very deeply rooted in their education, they might be very adept in what they have studied, but one thing that they have to understand is that they must remain humble in matters of religion at all cost. I mean, they must not never pose themselves as if they know everything. And this is not only just the case with religion, but every field of knowledge. They have to be humble. They have to communicate what they think to other people through reasoning, and that is all. If they must not force people to adopt something, they of course should be people who are ready to correct any mistakes that might come to them. And another important thing is that all religious scholars must encourage dialogue. They must be very proficient in dialogue, in engaging in dialogue, and especially the younger generation. If they are not able to engage with the younger generation, then that would be a big loss that, of course, we would all suffer from. Most importantly, they should be able to communicate in their language, in their jargon, the way they speak their language, and this is only possible if religious scholars are trained as such. So it's important that they must realize that reasoning is the way in which they must try to convince or try to put their case before people, not become adamant, not become self-righteous, not think that they have the ultimate knowledge in everything. encourage dialogue, encourage questioning, and if they are faced with something that they are not able to answer, they should humbly say that I'm going to think more and I'm going to get back to you. And that is how they should proceed. So all in all, dear viewers, this verse is a very, very special verse. It is a verse which calls forth, it is an appeal made to Muslim minds that just as you become specialists in other fields, here is one field in which you should become a specialist, and that is to become a scholar of religion, a deeply grounded scholar of religion. And if this is not possible, of course, then the Quran says that the requirement is also not such that every single person should become a scholar. Other than that, of course, people should have a general knowledge of religion in which they are able to understand the Quran. But of course, the requirement of being a scholar is only from a few people. So with this, we come to an end to a discussion on this verse, and we can now move on to our Q&A segment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shehzad, for a beautiful explanation. Our first question comes from Abrar. Please unmute your mic and ask your question.
سر میرا کوشچن یہ ہے کہ جو نبی علیہ السلام نے مسیلمہ کذاب کی تکفیر کی اور اسے جھوٹا نبی ڈکلیئر کیا، تو کیا نبی علیہ السلام کے اس عمل یا پھر اس ڈکلیریشن سے ہم یہ اصول اخذ نہیں کر سکتے کہ آج کے دور کے اندر بھی جو نبوت کا دعویٰ کرے گا تو ہم اسی اصول کے مطابق اس کی بھی تکفیر کریں اور اسے بھی جھوٹا نبی ڈکلیئر کریں؟
نہیں، ایسا بالکل نہیں کریں گے. اس کی وجہ یہ ہے کہ نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم نے جب ان کی تکفیر کی تو ان پہ اتمام حجت کیا گیا تھا. اللہ کی طرف سے حجت تمام کی گئی تھی جو ہم میں سے کوئی نہیں کر سکتا. تو اس کے نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کی زندگی کے بعد بھی بہت سارے لوگوں نے نبوت کا جھوٹا دعویٰ کیا، اور اس جھوٹے دعوے کو بس اگنور کرنا چاہیے، ان سے ڈائلاگ کرنا چاہیے. ایسے اکثر لوگ جو ہوتے ہیں وہ ذہنی توازن ان کا ٹھیک نہیں ہوتا جو نبوت کا دعویٰ کرتے ہیں، تو ان کے ساتھ اگر آپ نے ڈائلاگ کرنا ہے تو وہ کیجیے، ورنہ ان کو اگنور کیجیے، لیکن ان کی تکفیر نہیں کی جا سکتی. یہ میں آپ کو بار بار سمجھانے کی کوشش کرتا رہا ہوں کہ تکفیر کا حق جو ہے وہ صرف خدا کو ہے. خدا نے یہ حق اپنے رسولوں کے ذریعے سے ایکسرسائز کیا، لیکن وہ تب کیا کہ جب حق کو انہوں نے بالکل واضح کر دیا تھا. تو یہ کام رسولوں کے علاوہ کوئی کر نہیں سکتا.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Now, next question comes from Jaka. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If not, please let me know how is your name pronounced. So you can ask your question now.
سر میرا کوشچن یہ ہے کہ چونکہ آج ہم جب تراویح ادا کرتے ہیں تو اس میں ہم جب وطر تو جماعت پڑھتے ہیں امام کے ساتھ. سر اس میں مسئلہ یہ کہ اگر اتفاقاً کسی کی ایک رکعت چھوٹ جائے، تیسری جو وطر میں پہلی رکعت وہ چھوٹ جائے، تو جب امام تیسری رکعت میں مطلب اللہ اکبر کہہ کر دائی قنوت ادا وہ پڑھے، تو اس میں اس جو مقتدی ہو اس کو کیا کرنا چاہیے؟ کیونکہ وہ دوسری رکعت ہوگی اس کی، اس کو تیسری رکعت
کو ایسے ہی سمجھے جس طرح سے ہمارے پاس دونوں چوائسیز ہیں. جیسے آپ مغرب کی نماز اگر آپ کی ایک رکعت رہ جاتی ہے تو آپ اس کو آخری رکعت بھی سمجھ سکتے ہیں اور آپ اس کو پہلی رکعت بھی سمجھ سکتے ہیں. تو جس طرح آپ مغرب کی نماز کی قضا کرتے ہیں، اگر آپ کی ایک رکعت رہ جائے اس کو آپ پورا کرتے ہیں، بالکل ویسے ہی آپ نے وطروں کی بھی کرنی ہے.
نہیں سر میرا سوال یہی کہ جب وہ مطلب دائی قنوت ادا کرے تو کیا ہمیں وہی کرنا چاہیے اس وقت؟
آپ کو وہی کرنا چاہیے، آپ کو امام کو فالو کرنا چاہیے. اس کے بعد جب امام سلام پھیرے تو جو آپ کی چیز رہ گئی ہے اس وقت پورا کیجیے.
پھر تو وہ دائی قنوت پھر ہمیں ریپیٹ کرنا ہے تیسری رکعت میں؟
نہیں، دعائے قنوت تو آپ نے پڑھ لی ہے نا امام کے پیچھے،
تو پھر وہ دوسری رکعت میں آ گئے نا سر.
نہیں، اس سے فرق نہیں پڑتا. آپ نے 2 رکعتیں پڑھ لی ہیں امام کے پیچھے، اب آپ تیسری رکعت اپنی مکمل کر لیجیے. بعد میں آپ نے کل 3 پوری کرنی ہے نا.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's a question in the chat that there's a hadith that is often used to illustrate the importance of obedience to the husband. In that hadith, that woman was not allowed to even visit her sick father because her husband didn't allow. So doesn't this contradict how one has to take care of their parents and all, and what extent should they obey their husband?
Sorry, I was not fully able to, because there was some interruption in the connection. Could you repeat the hadith that you have said, the contents of the hadith?
Yeah, the hadith is that the importance of obedience to the husband, and the hadith, according to the question, the woman was not allowed to even visit her sick father because the husband didn't allow.
I don't think that I would not. This is something that needs to be checked out. I mean, where is this hadith? If you could send me that hadith, I can look it up. I'm pretty sure that this hadith has some more details which have not been reported. It is in normal circumstances, no one can stop wife from visiting her own father or mother, there has to be something some special detail which is either missing or the hadith is not authentic at all. So you need to send me the text and I can check it up then.
Sure, but she wants to know what extent one should obey their husband.
Well, actually, what we have to understand here is that the obedience to the husband, which is mentioned here, is regarding issues in which there is a deadlock. You see, in normal circumstances, Islam wants that the husband and wife, when they are running the affairs of the family or they are running a household, there could be differences in strategy, there could be differences of opinion in various things, and Islam expects that you would submit to the more logical opinion. Maybe at times the woman is more has the opinion that she's holding is far more logical. So the husband should submit to her and be convinced by her, and it should be vice versa as well. So in normal circumstances, it should be through reasoning that whichever view is more worthy of being accepted should be accepted by either of the two. But you see, at times there is a deadlock. I mean, at times the opinions are equally true, or there is no exact way to know which one is more sound. And such things generally relate to strategy. So in such a situation, when there is a deadlock, when after a lot of discussion and debate and trying to reason out, you find that there is a deadlock and the two are still adamant on their own view, it is here that the Quran says that the husband has the casting vote. So this is where the obedience part comes in. Other than that, of course, it only reflects the fact that husband and wife should be democratically running the affairs, and whenever they are not able to solve an issue, then one reason has to prevail, or one view has to prevail. So the Quran says that because the husbands are the head of the family, so in case of a deadlock, the view of the husband is going to prevail. Also important to realize here is that there are certain things in which a husband cannot even give a directive. For example, as she has just asked, that no husband has the right to stop her wife or his wife from meeting her parents at all. This is something that he would be doing. If he's doing, then he's crossing his own bounds. So in matters in which the Sharia has given a definite directive, and or wife is following her own choice in that matter, the husband has no right to stop her in that case.
Thank you. Ibad Ajmal, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Shehzad. This verse, जो अभी हमने आज पढ़ लिया, I know it was directed towards a specific, scholars of Islam. But for instance, let's say, can this count for any specific skill set? For example, if I'm an architect and I decide to research on Islamic geometry or, towards designing well-designed mosques, so does that also apply to it?
No, that would not apply to it, because you see, that is just a secondary research that you're doing, maybe writing an assignment, maybe writing a paper, or maybe trying to solve a question that might be posed to you, or just researching on your own. So this is like a subcategory of Islam. When you become a scholar of religion, you are deeply grounded in religion. You are taught certain disciplines. So it's just like saying that you might do some research on a medicine in a particular case, but that would not make you a doctor. In order to become a doctor, you need to study the whole course in a very detailed way. But yes, maybe partially, if you're given some assignment on a particular medicinal issue, you might do that. So the two are entirely different.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Imran Ahmed, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Saab. My question is this about related to Salah specifically? At times when we're trying to be very involved in our Salah, we'll say the Arabic, and in our mind we'll do the, let's say, English translation or in any language translation, and it can become a bit too literal. This is the state of confusion I'm talking about. For example, if you read Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, it'll translate as this one God, no other, and Muhammad is servant, is messenger. But because we have a habit of saying Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is that, just as an example, is that a case of getting too literal? Does it matter if we just say Muhammad, his servant, and messenger, because that's what the literal translation relates to?
I mean, either of the two is okay. It's perfectly all right if you do either of the two. There is not an issue. If you take the full, that is also fine. If you just take his name, that is also fine.
Thank you, Dr.
Because it's not the state of mind where you can get too confused and get too literal, I guess, in any translation.
If you see it, just leave it to the situation. You see, when you're reciting something in your mind, the thing comes up and it crops up in your own mind, and just follow that.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Baran, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Sir, my question is, when you are meeting a potential spouse, for example, you're talking for marriage, are you allowed to discuss details of intimacy? Because, for example, we know that intimacy can be very important in a marriage, and maybe one of the two people have very different view of intimacy. But if you are not allowed to discuss it before marriage, it's like almost a gamble you are taking, and it might lead to divorce. So, what is the appropriate way to discuss these kind of details with a potential spouse?
I think while keeping in the norms of modesty, perhaps the best thing would be to discuss it by writing it down, by communicating it through writing, because verbally it might become a little awkward. So maybe you can exchange some messages or maybe an email that this is how you view such instances of intimacy and how you would like to go about it, and if there is any objection from the other person. So yes, you're right, this is important, and it's just to keep yourself within the bounds of modesty. I think the best way would be to communicate in writing.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very
Shehzad.
much.
There's a question that was someone asked in the chat. What are your thoughts on nikah without rukhsati? These days it has become more like halal dating, where the only reason for the nikah is to allow the couple to stay together as much as they like. But the rukhsati is delayed for reasons like completing education. Some people argue that religious injunction is nikah and not the rukhsati itself, but then there is no reason to delay it in itself. What's the correct attitude regarding this?
Well, actually, when you delay the departure of the bride, is generally due to some social reason. And as far as the nikah itself is concerned, I mean, once that has happened, it is as good as marriage. And I mean, normally what happens is that people would like that the bride should depart from her home and go to the husband's house. But as I said, there are situations in which does not happen. And if this does not happen, then it doesn't matter, because in that case too, the two are, I mean, the two are absolutely a husband and wife. And if they choose to spend time together, whether in private or in public, that is absolutely fine. But you see, every society has its own traditions also. So while the Sharia has nothing to object about it, if you are meeting your wife in private, once the nikah has been done and the rukhsati or the departure has not taken place. But you see, a lot of things also, as I said, depend on the society that you live in. There are certain norms of the society. In many Eastern societies, this is not considered to be appropriate. It's inappropriate behavior. So I think we should go by those norms, because those norms at times they have their own value and their own wisdom. And of course, if they are not followed, then at times what happens is that needless criticism arises. But as I said, if the person does not follow those norms for any other reason, he would not be sinning in the eyes of God.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Rafia Khwaja, you may ask your question now. Rafia Khwaja.
Yeah, Dr. Shehzad, I wanted to know what is disturbing me. I can't understand what is the position of women in Pakistan. I don't know if you recently read of a case of what's happened in Tawbah takes in, where a father and brother killed the sister, and they were committing incest with her, and the brother smothered while the father watched it, and the whole video became viral. I was sick to the stomach, because if a woman is not safe in her own house from the hands of her brother and father, so what are the men in our country? Are they monsters? And what are we women? Some pitiless human beings to be used like that? I mean, I just want your comments on it, because it's extremely tragic and disturbing.
Well, I think you see, what happens is that exceptions they make horrific headlines. So of course it was a horrific and a terrible instance that we all simply cannot come to grips with. But remember that this savagery is found not just in our own societies. This is found all over the world, and these are very exceptional situations in which we have to understand that men, they have gone way beyond. They are not humans at all when they do such things. They are savage animals, maybe worse than animals, because even animals have their own norms. So I think they are sick in their minds. And this sickness in their minds, it does not mean that every person is like that or every home is like that. This is a very, very exceptional situation. So I think that we should also understand that whereas this is a 0.01% happening, 99.9% homes maybe are safe from this. So this one happening should not make us alarm so much that we should generalize it. But yes, at the same time, we just cannot undermine it anyway or downplay it, because it is something that we cannot even, it's the nature of its I mean how horrible it is and how horrific it is, something that we cannot even express in words, and our blood boils when we even read about it. But yes, such people have to be punished in an exemplary way so that does not happen anymore. And at the same time, more awareness has to be created. And also, we have to understand that these are exceptional happenings and we should not generalize them.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Ahmed, you may ask your question now.
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन, मुझे आपका वो आंसर समझ आ गया था कि हम किसी की तकफीर नहीं कर सकते। क्या हम जो इस तरह के मुद्दई नबूवत हैं, क्या हम ये भी नहीं कह सकते उनके हवाले से कि ये झूठे नबी हैं या फिर दज्जाल हैं?
वो तो हम कहेंगे कि वो फॉल्स प्रॉफिट्स हैं, झूठा नबी कहने में तो कोई हर्ज नहीं है, लेकिन उनकी तकफीर नहीं की जा सकती। तकफीर का तो मतलब है कि आप उनको काफिर करार दे रहे हैं। ये तो हम ये कहेंगे कि भाई हाँ, नबूवत का झूठा दावा किया हुआ, ये तो बिल्कुल सही बात है, बिल्कुल ठीक है, इसमें कहने में कोई हर्ज नहीं है।
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Mansoor, you may ask your question now.
Sir, in Surah Jummah it is mentioned, then when the prayer ends, disperse in the land and see God's bounty. Is this a bonding?
No, it's not a binding thing at all. It only means that once you are done with the Jummah prayer, the binding part is finished. Now you can spread in the earth, seek God's bounty, go back to your work, go back to your professions. So it's just like telling people that once the azan for the Jummah prayer is sounded, now your obligation is to go to the mosque. And your obligation finishes once you have finished the prayer. Now you can go back to your own work. But of course, that doesn't mean that you have to go back to your work. It only means that the time in which you are required to be attentive to God and give up all work was the time in which you were offering that Jummah prayer.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. There's a question that I will take that was in the chat. What must one do when a person has lost faith in his or her spouse? Because when one tries to explain the issue, it is always taken as that you're always correcting me, and then starts hitting themselves. And with all of that, if one feels disconnected with their spouse and in turn is attached to another person, what should one do in this scenario?
Well, my advice would be that if you can give the questioner my number and he or she can get in touch with me personally, because this is something in which some more details would be needed in order to give an advice. And I can do that if the person reaches out to me. Okay.
I'll repeat my question. Countries are legalizing same-sex marriage, but I wanted to ask, do governments have a say in who marry who, regardless of gender or religion or race? So do they have the right to legalize or not legalize the same-sex marriage or something?
Well, actually, we have to understand that the legislation part of an Islamic or of any state, or what we would say is the Muslim approach, is that anything which usurps the rights of people or is a threat to life, wealth, and honor. So these are the two bases. Anything which goes against this, laws can be enacted. So in order for the same-sex marriage issue, because this is an issue in which the marriage institution itself can be threatened, and so therefore if we ban these same-sex marriages, it would be in line with this understanding that because anything which hampers the marriage institution or which becomes a threat to the marriage institution, because you see, marriage itself is something which always takes place between two opposite genders. It has its own philosophy. It is meant to create that harmony between two opposite genders so that the child or the children which are born to them, they are given the affection of a mother and a father. We know that a child has to have certain things from the father which a mother cannot give, and certain things from the mother which the father cannot give. And the children itself are a means to sustain life on this planet. So this is the scheme of the Almighty, and anything which is subversive to the scheme, anything which poses a threat to the scheme, we can make a law against it.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for an enlightening session. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We will be concluding our session here. Have a great rest of the day. See you all tomorrow. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.